Hello everyone and welcome to Wowhead Weekly number 297. We were just earlier discussing how close we are to 300. Another three shows to hit that big milestone. As promised last week, we will dive into the Sylvanas novel this week, so that's going to be quite a bit to discuss, some surprising things, and some of the speculations that we discussed last week is also coming to truth. On top of that, we'll also discuss some talks of the Dragonflight new expansion. So we'll look at some of the more confirmed things around that and discuss what we think about it. Before we get into anything, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Annie, or also known as Annie Fuchsia, a full-time streamer on Twitch. My co-host is, as usual, the lovely Perculia.
Hey, I'm Perk. I run Wowhead, overseeing a lot of the behind-the-scene things for news, guides, and features. And it's always really nice to do the show and be in front of the camera for a change and talk about some of the important community topics we have seen on the site. Sometimes I'm joined by a cat, but he just ran off. But maybe he'll be back later on. So.
We tried to time it. We were like, bright pause here, let's get the show started. Nope.
So the bulk of our show will be discussing the Sylvanas novel. We were going to discuss it last week, but then the cinematics and all the dialogue options popped up, so we'll be discussing that. And then this interesting Dragonflight source code that popped up on Blizzard's website that, you know, could be something. We usually stay out of leak season, but if something is on Blizzard's own website, you know, we could discuss that in the history of other things that have popped up on the website.
Exactly. So we'll be covering it in a sense of looking at actual data that can lead to certain speculations and not necessarily discussing rumors, as that feels a bit pointless. We're looking at the real deal stuff that is more likely to be very accurate. So that's what we'll be doing today. We had a comment in the chat about Perk being a little bit lower. I did turn her up as you said that. Please let me know if I should turn her up further. And yeah, we can continue talking about this stuff.
Yeah. So, why don't we discuss the Dragonflight stuff first?
Yeah. I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
Since the novel is quite a bit of a deep dive. So yeah, tell us what you guys found on these behind these websites.
So, on March 31st, Blizzard added some interesting data to the source code on the WoW website. And it was basically like, you know, product IDs for an expansion that had base, heroic, and epic pre-purchasing options. And the name of this was all WoW Dragonflight. And if you looked at the source code, it had like 2 slashes, which is indicating a comment. Like it's not even code. It's like, oh, we're you know, we are adding these slashes and an explanation of, you know, what 303013 means. We're indicating that is, you know, the base heroic. And
which is quite interesting.
And then someone else in the comments on the Wowhead article pointed out that there were Dragonflight Web Certifications registered last week, pointing to the Dragonflight Blizzard.com URL. So that is pretty interesting. You know, the timing, of course, is suspect because this was March 31st, and I believe it's since been removed.
The code has been removed now.
Yeah, but, you know, like, this was on the... This was on the official WoW website, and there has been... some previously data mined encryption items, which seems that they could be deluxe expansion rewards, because one of them has a spell effect related to dragons called 9FX Drake Mount Emerald. So if there's hints that there could be a big encrypted item related to like a shop mount or pet that, you know, is pretty big in size with this dragon, you know, spell effect, and then we have these product IDs that in documentation hint at Dragonflight. It could be something, or it could be a very elaborate red herring, because people are usually really bad at commenting and documenting their code. So
yeah,
it
and
could
this is
almost be
oddly
too deliberate.
specific.
Yeah, it could almost be like, oh, let's throw them off track, and I don't, like, put something here. Yeah.
Let me bring it forward again. So just to explain it once again for anyone who's not familiar with coding. So the 2 slashes there makes the text go a little bit gray. So it says / wow Dragonflight base pre-purchase. And then it says right underneath it 303013. So the numbers there are part of the programming itself. It's necessary for this to be able to work, be executed in any way. The / is a pure comment. You can write anything there. You can write Hello Kitty. It doesn't matter. It's just a comment. So it's really interesting that they decided to put the exact expansion name there.
Yeah.
Like, fully written out as well. Because they could put something like WoW new XPack.
10.0, yeah.
Yeah, or they could put WoW 10.0 base pre-purge or something, but they put the name of the expansion. And it's interesting because it could be, like you said, some kind of red herring, or it could be... do you think anyone would do that on purpose?
No, it's tricky, right? Because it does seem to be an oops at first glance, but there's been a lot of recent... occurrences. I think this is the 3rd time, specifically with WoW even, related to Shadowlands. The first time with Shadowlands, the shop updated early with image assets, and one was of Bolvar. It was like a poster or something of him, and that was like a hint that, Shadowlands was coming next. And I think that was unintended because the gear shop was a bit disorganized, and the people doing the gear shop are like third-party merch people.
Yeah, it's different people.
But, Bolvar leaked. And then leading up to 9.1, we had the whole press kit for Chains of Domination, including that one piece of art of Anduin as, dominated by the jailer. And that was put out, I think, like a day early or a few days early. And now we have this Dragonflight thing. So it's hard to say, since this keeps happening, if this is, if like they're one-off accidents, because like it's a different type of like leak each time, or if this is a way to build hype now that the epilogue of Shadowlands is over, and get people thinking about the next thing, because it certainly did get people talking about it.
Oh yeah, it definitely did. So I am curious if it was on purpose, because having comments that are that specific, it feels intentional. It really feels intentional.
You would think that Blizzard would have a style guide or something, being like, for code on the website, like we have a naming convention, called all expansion by names, or like internal product names. But yeah, this feels very intentional.
Yeah, it really does.
Whether it was misdirection, or it feels very odd. Someone typed like, WoW Dragonflight epic pre-purge.
Because why would you also write WoW first of all? It's like it's too much text, and it's like if you really want to write the expansion name, maybe write it as DF or something, like something short. Like when you're sitting there programming, I did some software engineering myself when I was in uni. You want to write as little as possible, but still get all the information out. And typing it out fully like that. A little bit sussy.
Like, WoW Dragonflight upgrade from heroic to epic. You're just like, okay. There's a big neon sign. Yeah. It's like, oh, we want everyone to understand what's going on here.
In case you don't know how an upgrade works,
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it could go... I think that dragons could be a part of the next expansion, whether this is misdirection or not, because... I think, some interviews have said, we're going to go back to Azeroth, and, Ysera played a big role in Ardenweald, and there were, even some stories tying in Alexstrasza, helping her awaken, and the dragons kind of had a big, like, catch-up story in 8-3, to see how they were all doing. I think that we could revisit them. They've kind of been on the back burner for a few expansions, and, if Shadowlands was too, like, weird and fantastical, it's like, oh, dragons are very, core to Warcraft and high fantasy recognizable.
And also now that Sylvanas is gone for now, we need another, badass woman out there, and a very beautiful one is Alexstrasza. So that could work out. Why not? Give her the front page for a while as Sylvanas is gone. I'll take it. But yeah, no, I think it does make sense. It's been speculated to be about dragons for a while now. So I think this coming out hasn't been too surprising for most people. And that is also why it's the perfect red herring, if it is one. Yeah. Because they probably know that people have been suspecting it. So, it's... I think it's interesting. If this was done just to cause, questions and hype, which is possible, then it definitely did work. And I think most people are now just waiting for April 19th to get the final words on what the expansion is going to be.
Something that was interesting is for a while, the ahead of the curve mounts would hint at the next expansion. Like with Legion, at the end of Warlords, there was that moose that like hinted at Val'sharah.
Yeah, that's true.
And then their BFA at the end of Legion, we had the bird mount that was like tying in with Azerite. And at the end of BFA, we had that, dragon that was, like, mysteriously purified from that one flight. And everyone's like, oh, is Dragon's going to be next? And then instead we went to Shadowlands, but they could be picking up that story thread. Because BFA had a lot of dragon hints with, the different dragonflights returning to, the island expeditions, some of those... island flavor text items hinting at, what came next. And then, with people were thinking, then 8-3, how all the dragonflights came back, and then Wrathion got a new model, and we saw what happened to all the dragonflights, after they were out of the spotlight for a few years, and that was pretty well received, so, I think people assumed dragons could come next after BFA, and maybe it makes sense still to return to them now.
Yeah, I think it definitely does, because the story hasn't really moved too much back in Azeroth, so it makes sense. We, before Shadowlands, like you mentioned, we did meet Wrathion as well. He kind of came back after being gone for a while, so things did start tying together a bit, and I guess we also did fill up some of the holes, since we did get to see more of Ysera as well in Ardenweald, so that story did continue a little bit. So I think it does give a complete sense of getting back there, especially as we're coming back to Azeroth to probably have to deal with a lot of things. We could use help from the dragonflights.
It does make sense if, we have this sword in Azeroth, and the dragons were always kind of looking over us until they, lost their powers, and if everything's a mess back on Azeroth, the dragons might be like, hey, how can we regain our powers? Let's see what's up in the Dragon Isles, or, I can see how they would be trying to, once again, protect and help Azeroth, which I also imagine is not doing super well after the jailer is, flinging bolts of magic at Azeroth during the encounter with us.
Yeah. I'm still hoping for some real damages that we can actually see. I'm not certain we will see that, but I do hope that we can see some visible damage. Obviously, maybe not to the scale of the sword.
I wouldn't mind visible damage. I just don't want it to sit there for like the next 10 years. Like, you go to Medieval Harbor and you're like, oh wow, it's still flooded. Like,
that's true. That's true. I mean, even the sword is still there, but we're not doing anything about it. Feels a bit silly.
So, Yeah, I definitely think that dragons make sense, and if Shadowlands was critiqued for being too like, you know,
Non-Azeroth.
yeah, like too non-Azeroth, dragons are pretty Azeroth, as well
Mm-hmm.
as finally going to the Dragon Isles. Like, this is a place people have known about for a really long time, as opposed to Shadowlands, where everything was like, totally made up. And if they're exploring things like the cosmic forces some more, a lot of people have been lost by that. But if you balance it with, these very recognizable dragons, that's like a fantastical thing that people
Mm-hmm.
actually get hype about.
Very true.
So,
Shadowlands was a big taking, honestly. It was a big project
yeah.
for them to take on like that because it's the life after death, which means they had a whole pool of so many characters that they could
I
have
know.
chosen between. So it's kind of like it's almost impossible to even do it right because there's so many characters that could be talked about, could be in stories, could be in cutscenes. So it's probably like a nice, like breathe out to just focus on like an Azeroth story that goes forward rather than going back and seeing which stories do people want to hear more about. And no matter what you pick, there will be people who missed something else. And yeah, it's a rough one.
Yeah. I can't remember if we brought it up last week, but something we've highlighted in the news since then, just as an example, is the Tauren Heritage Armor Quest strongly hinted that Bane was going to reunite with his father because he was talking to spirits, and Bane's like, so much I want to tell you, but we don't have time another time. So everyone's like, the Shadowlands, and like,
perfect opportunity.
Bane they didn't really use him in anything. Like, he was like, he was missing in Oribos for a while. Or he just would like tag along in the background and like say a few words.
Just sit around.
Yeah, a lot of people just thought that was a missed opportunity for him.
And it was.
Yeah. And like he just sort of got used as a punching bag. Like, he got captured in Shadowlands, captured by Sylvanas in BFA, and then he just
that's true.
around.
He got captured in both expansions.
Yeah.
That's actually true.
So, there was this dialogue where Lorthamar is like, hey, Bane, like, do you want to see anyone before we go back? I'm going to talk to Kael'thas. And Bane was like, oh, if you met my father, that's fine. He is always with me. And it's like, okay, well, it's like, okay, they're acknowledging that people thought that Bane would see his father. And it's like, it's...
Like, with a quick one-liner.
It's like that could have been its own story, and as we'll get into with the Sylvanas thing, like, with the whole... Even Anduin didn't really get a proper spotlight after he, got saved in his encounters. So, there were so many rush things, like, you could have, like, Night Elf spirits reuniting,
Yep.
We had Thrall with his mom. What about Thrall with his dad? Like,
Yeah, that's the thing. It would be impossible to include everything. Yeah. And because they took on this task of dealing with a place where all these characters could be met with, there will always be disappointments because there will always be missed opportunities. Many characters and different families and stories unexplored. So it's, it was a bit of an impossible task, really, to make it a great story.
And then you have like all these fantastical zones that have no visual similarities to Azeroth, and they all have leaders that are brand new that we have not met before. And it just is like, it's a very tall order. And then, of course, the endless systems upon systems. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so, hopefully whatever they've learned, if it's like if it does go with dragons, hopefully it won't be like pick your Dragonflight Covenant to align yourself with. Hopefully they will have learned some things from Covenants if that's something similar.
I saw a tweet from Max, who is a world first raider, and he says, can't wait to, pick one of 4 Dragonflights for an awesome, cool power for next expansion. And then everyone's correcting him how there isn't 4 of them. And then he's like, okay, I'm sorry, I don't know anything. But yeah, it's funny, and I think they have hopefully learned from Shadowlands and won't do that again. I don't think anyone really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, even the idea that they're, if they go with dragons over the shadow. No, Brightpaw. Sorry if that was noisy. He just headbutted the microphone.
No noise. He's good.
Okay,
he knows how to headbutt without disturbing us.
Brightpaw. Oh, now he's sitting on the keyboard. Right. He's so smart. But yeah, so we don't want to speculate too much on what could be in the expansion because we don't even know if Dragonflight is true. But you know, we do like the idea of highlighting dragons in some way because they are like both fantastical but also very Azeroth. So you know, if BFA was too realistic and not magical enough, and Shadowlands was super magical and not Azeroth enough, Dragon seems to be a good middle ground.
Agreed.
And yeah, hopefully we will learn more on the 19th about this, or who knows, maybe there'll be like a press kit that just shows up early if, you know,
accidental press kit leak.
Yeah. But yeah, why don't we spend like the next hour or so discussing the Sylvanas novel? Yeah. Unless you guys have any further questions on the expansion stuff.
I think it sounds like a good idea. There are further other types of rumors and everything going around with the expansion that we didn't want to go into too much detail, as rumors, especially when they, you know, end up not being true, can be not so fun to
to and then like if people watch this show and it's usually reporting on actual news, I don't want people being like, oh well, you know, Wowhead reported that there was going to be like 4 new classes and like. You know,
Wowhead turning into the evening tabloids.
So,
we don't want to discuss gossip, but rather just you know, look at the facts and speculate.
So the Sylvanas novel, I was fortunate enough to get an advance copy of it. So Wowhead has been churning out a bunch of articles on the novel this past week. We did our review of it. We had an exclusive interview with the author. And because we know reading isn't everyone's medium, and there's a lot of plot in this book, we've done spotlight articles on the deal with the jailer, and Wrathgate, and Teldrassil, and Helya. And there's just a lot of ground covered. So I thought maybe we could talk about, like, what I thought of the book, and just sort of, like, what the novel was trying to do, like, did it do it well, should it have needed to explain all these things, should some of these things have been in the game, and then we can talk about some of the plot points, and if you guys have questions being like, you know, hey, did the novel cover this, I can answer that too, so.
I think that sounds like a great plan. But yeah, like Perk said, if you have not had the chance to get the book yet, like me, you can consume the story through Wowhead, through the different articles. If you want to get yourself up to date, if you prefer, you can of course just wait for the book and read it yourself. But we will also do the favor of going through different topics, one article at a time, the ones that we thought were, you know, the most interesting to discuss here on the show. And if you want to know more about it, there are more articles on the Wowhead website to get into whichever topic interests you.
Yeah. So, for those of you that haven't read the book, Sylvanas goes over her entire life, including her living story as a child, ending in the epilogue with, you know, basically what happens in patch 925. The book is framed where she's telling her story to Anduin, hoping to convince him to the jailer's side in 9.0, and then after each section, Anduin kind of puts it in a perspective. It's very, I think that the book almost could have been like its own trilogy, because it has to cover so much ground, and the author certainly had a daunting task because she had to portray Sylvanas sympathetically when she was alive, show how Sylvanas's character slowly changed when she was undead, and fill in a ton of blanks as to what actually happened with, like, the jailer and Wrathgate and Teldrassil and a bunch of other plot points, all in, say, like, 300 or so pages. So there was a lot to cram in. And I think that, you know, there was a lot she had to do, and I think if the book was a trilogy, it could have like breathed more. Like I think it would have been really cool if there was a book devoted to her like high elf life, and then a book dedicated to her as the Banshee Queen, and then a book dealing with her when she worked with the jailer. Because the first half of the book where she was like alive, it moved like very slowly, and you got to see her kind of like relaxed, growing up and interacting with her sisters and her brother and her parents. And then when she became an adult, the pace picked up a bit, and you don't really get to see her like thriving in her element as the Ranger General. It's just like, oh no, tragedy happened, like, you know, her parents died, like, we have an attack here. So you see her side of events, but you don't really see her like, you know, as a leader, like what made her great. And then it gets even more rushed when it's when she you know, turns undead. Like it just kind of goes from like iconic plot point to plot point, and you don't really get her interacting with very many like undead or the Undercity. It's just like it just kind of zips along.
It became like event after event, like Teldrassil real quick, then this event real quick, and this event real quick. Kind of like, we have to cover these events, and we don't have many more pages to work with.
So I mean, but like if you're told like you have 150 pages, you have to explain all these things, including like the failed you know, kill attempt on Arthas, and how she got her body back, and bringing the Blood Elves into the Horde, and like war crimes with Varisa and the Jailer and Wrathgate. Like, there's a lot to cover, but I would have liked if the book had slightly more space, so it could address the parts that made Sylvanas the character that people really seem to love. Like, with the Undercity, we only see her dealing with, like, administrative things like Putris and the Blight, or, oh no, we're under attack, you know, betrayal, and we don't really get to see her in her element. And I think that there's a lot of, like showing, like, you know, explicitly showing something instead of just, like, depicting it. And I think it would have been good if there was more space for it to breathe. Like, another example, there's two examples that kind of stick to mind. One is how we see that Nathanos is, like, totally lost his humanity. He's just, like, a mindless undead shambling around. And Sylvanas spends, like, a month trying to get him to return to himself. And, like, that never happened before. And it seems, like, really momentous, but it only has, like a page or two, or we don't actually see her talking to Helia. It's just explained in a paragraph to Nathanos after. And I think that those would have been really interesting dynamics to explain over a few pages that we don't really have time to see. And it's also, I think, the book is trying to do something very interesting, which the interview confirms, how, like, as Sylvanas gets, like, further and further into, you know, working with the jailer, but also just after her trauma and becoming undead, she's not the most reliable narrator. Like, she'll say something, but then her actions will show something else. And if the book... So, like, if you read it really fast, you may miss some of these contradictions if you just take what she's saying as fact.
To face value.
But then, like, when you reread it, you're like, oh, there are contradictions. And I think that because, you know, WoW players sometimes aren't used to nuance, and the book moves along fast, that it would have been good if there was more time to expand upon that so it was clearer. Like, there's this kind of one infamous line where she's like, the Forsaken are, you know, like, nothing to me, like, they're just useful. But then you see her actions, and you're like, she's putting a lot of time into this race that she claims she feels nothing for. Or when she gets her body back, she's thinking to herself, like, this means nothing, I just want to kill Arthas. But with her body language, she's acting really, like, happy about
actions.
it. Yeah, where she's like, I don't feel any love for Nathanos. It's like, well, you just, like, sat here for a month trying to bring him back to himself, and no character that has lost themselves has ever been, you know, pulled back. And when you reflect on it, you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but it just moves along really fast, that I think it would have been good to go a little slower during that part, but there's, you know, only so much space.
Mm-hmm. That was one of
Um,
the things that you
yeah,
guys mentioned in the interview,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So, yeah, just looking, we actually have it stickied on the front page. Um, but yeah, so, 1 second.
Yeah, that's okay. I
Yeah,
see a comment in the chat as well about the events
yeah,
of the book being sped up in the end. That's another thing that was talked about
yeah,
in the interview as well. And I think there was partial things to do with, I believe, that there is something in that truth of the parts that were covering game events were situations
yeah,
that we were still somewhat, you know, potentially familiar with, and that's why it felt like it was less needed to go into in the same detail as her, you know, whole life story part, like the alive part. But I think still, how Perk mentioned it, if we had all these different parts of her life maybe put into a trilogy and still would have lots of details, even if we are familiar with the certain events, I think it would still be a nice way to be able to read a book. Because when you're reading the book, even if it's repeating things that you may already know, it's still a nice way to, you know, consume the story in that way. So it's
yeah,
nicer than things being rushed. It can be understandable in a book when everything has to be cramped in such a short piece. But that's where the part of it being a trilogy could have potentially been, or just maybe even just a sequel, like 2 books,
yeah.
could have helped
So,
the meatiness of that story.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so looking at this, we asked the question, you know, there is a distinct tonal shift in the book from her alive life to her dead life. The alive section is vivid, detailed story-like. The dead section covers a huge amount of ground in a short span. Was this due to length and time or to, contrast her living
Oh
versus
yeah.
dead?
Mm-hmm.
And the author replied, no, there are a lot of reasons for that tonal shift. Some choices were out of necessity, others were stylistic choices. The Alive section is full of things that are new to the reader, so that they're coming from
Yeah.
a sense of discovery about her that's not possible when we revisit scenes that many readers have played through. You know, goes on to say that, you know, they wanted to convey a sense of, you know, the innate energy of life, and they wanted to really show that, you know, Sylvanas used to be a girl who was horrified to think that a prank could actually, really hurt someone, and that, you know, she used to be someone that liked jokes, and, you know, she laughed easily, and, you know, they wanted to really show this part of her that we haven't really seen in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, they did say that we chose to focus on scenes in the later part that were direct connections to Sylvanas regarding what the jailer had told her, which meant that many moments in her unliving years that didn't directly affect the plot were not addressed or else were summarized.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't think that the tonal shift is a bad thing, but I do think that the second half needed more room to explore the shift, and I think it would have been cool to just see her, you know, as this unliving ruler that the Forsaken really liked, because it just kind of assumes we know that. But you know, if you just show this character in a bunch of like crisis situations, you don't really get a sense of like her as a competent leader.
Yeah.
And you know, I think it would have been cool to have more of that.
Mm-hmm. To
Um,
go into her undead
yeah,
part, but in a more
yeah.
personal sense rather than retelling the most key events.
Yeah. So I think we'll highlight some of the moments from the book that
Mm-hmm.
cover important in-game, well, should have been in-game moments, and then we can just sort of go to the bigger picture and be like, you know, should this have been in the game? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, this was told well in the book, but maybe this should have been in the game. So, yeah, why don't we discuss her deal with the jailer first?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think that sounds like a good start.
so, yeah. So looking at the deal with the jailer, this was kind of a tricky needle to thread because Blizzard said at BlizzCon that she first met this jailer during a short story set between Wrath and Cataclysm. where Sylvanas tries to end her life, thinking that it has no meaning after Icecrown Citadel, and then is presented with this vision that she's going to go to Super Hell, unless she, decides to go back with the Valkyr on her side, and talks to this mysterious voice that 10 years later is revealed to be the Jailer. And it's always been a mystery as to what went on in this conversation. So... yeah, we finally have the full story of what happened, and the Jailer kind of says more here than he does throughout all of Shadowlands, so I definitely feel like this would have made her more sympathetic if this was actually included at the start of Shadowlands. And there's
and it
lots
would
of
build him a lot
turns.
more as well, because we don't really see him do anything or say much.
No.
And this paints a much more vivid picture of what's going on here. And it builds up how everything happened with... we have a little scene with Sylvanas talking to Arthas, but having a scene where Sylvanas... flashbacks of Sylvanas and Jailer at this time would have been more... more effective. More story actually being told. Because we're missing a lot of it. People are still wondering, why did Sylvanas work with the Jailer? If she doesn't serve, why did she serve? What happened? What was the deal?
She just looks like she's not very smart.
Yeah, exactly.
At certain times when people were like, how did Sylvanas not notice the runes were just like Arthas? Or, why is she saying she'll never serve? Or, there's a lot of factors that, or they're like, I thought was Sylvanas always with the Jailer? Even when she was making Undercity, was she always his pawn? Or it's like, was she scheming with him in Cataclysm and Mop? She was acting differently then than she was in, say, BFA. And this really clears a lot of it up. And
yeah, we got a lot of answers.
They wanted to delay the book, I think, for the epilogue. But I honestly feel like the book could have been released in 9.0 and you just have the epilogue be like a short story or something that comes after, because I think that this would have been really good info to have, and it makes both characters more multi-dimensional. So
because right now people are upset about how the Sylvanas part of the story is being told and the part of the Jailer being told, and this ties both of them together in a way that answers a lot of questions. So, yeah, this definitely should have been part of the game to make more sense of things.
Yeah, so as the blanks are filled in, one thing we learn is that at first, Sylvanas does not trust the Jailer. He tries to get on her good side and is like, everything you know is a lie about free will, there's no justice. But Sylvanas is like, hey, your runes are like Frostmourne. I'm not trusting you. Which is something everyone has always wondered about. How did she not see the signs?
Yeah, why did she just go and do things with him? But now it's very clear that she didn't. She specifically says here's a line, I will listen to nothing you have to say. Your words stink of lies. I am dead. I am this because of you. Why would I ever aid you? So, and this speaks a lot different to what everyone has been wondering about, because she did seemingly just get on his side and then get Anduin recruited as well, and people were confused about it. But this shows a little bit more of what Sylvanas' personality is, and it's a miss to not include this in the game.
Yeah. So the Jailer tries to hand that away, and it's like, oh, actually, I'm under the same control that, you were. We're both victims here. And, Sylvanas is still suspicious, but the Jailer is playing upon her feelings to be like, oh, we've both been wronged by this magical force. We've both been treated poorly. He, appeals to her sense of, trauma and injustice.
Yeah, and because it's interesting. There's never any force of any kind. There's no imprisonment. No. There is nothing. He's just talking to her, and he's trying his best to convince her. And I guess this is the part where they want to portray the whole manipulating part of his persona to come out.
Which I would have liked to have seen more of that in game, because I mean the jailer in game just like says very cliched things, and you're like, how did this guy like mastermind all these things? Like, he just sounds like, you know, some like guy on like a Saturday morning cartoon.
Like we're told he's this mastermind, you know, master manipulator, 5D chess person, but we don't see anything that he's doing. And here we get a sense of it, because we see how he's talking to Sylvanas. We see how he's getting to her through her weaknesses and trying to relate them together. And even in the end, he doesn't force her, but instead he lets her go to see for herself, to be convinced.
Yeah. And I think that it would have been really good if this came out in 9.0, because we could hear the jailer being like, oh, like, you know, I was betrayed, like, I did nothing wrong, and we could have that contrasted with what the other characters are saying, and, you know, we could see firsthand the lack of anima and what that's doing to the realms. And, you know, I think that if we're like, oh, the jailer's being super persuasive, but we're seeing firsthand that, no, he's kind of an asshole.
And we could see through his lies in that way too, because we would know things that he's lying to Sylvanas about, and that could also help us understand how, what's the word? How much lies there is behind everything.
Yeah. Like, the whole I will never serve even makes a lot more sense, because the jailer explicitly says, I do not desire a slave Sylvanas Windrunner. I need an ally.
Yep. Someone whose mind is keen enough to understand my goal, and who is strong enough to see it through, no matter the cost. With these words, you start understanding why Sylvanas would be convinced, because she is the kind of person to go no matter the cost, if something is right in her mind.
Yeah, so it makes a lot more sense how in interviews they're like, oh, like, Sylvanas views herself as an equal to the jailer, and it's like, well, yeah, he said that in this deal. And then this is the part where it starts getting into the jailer's lies. So the jailer is like, well, you know, hey, you were being sent to the Maw. Like, do you think you deserve to be sent to the Maw? Like, just because Arthas did this to you? Like, this seems super unfair, and I'm gonna give you this tour of the Shadowlands so you can see how unfair this realm is. And that's also very manipulative, because we have seen for ourselves firsthand that, kind of how the Kyrians did things was, you know, kind of not great. And, you know, how Cyrdan Athreus was exploiting things in Revendreth for himself. And, you know, when you think about all the realms, they have something a little strange with them. But the jailer embellishes it further to play upon Sylvanas' sense of injustice. Like, the jailer tells Sylvanas that, you know, families are, like, purposely split up in the Shadowlands. Yeah. And we've seen that's not true, because we've seen families that are together in the Shadowlands. And, you know, Sylvanas, her family was so important to her that she's, like, horrified by this. And, or, you know, he's also like, oh, Arthas ended up in the Maw because of what he did as the Lich King. And it's not like, well, actually, Uther threw him into the Maw, and that wasn't intended. So, you know, there's a lot of half-truths here. So, also, the jailer already had a portion of Sylvanas' soul. So, the jailer is all like, you know, the jailer is not totally hands-off here like he's making it seem. So,
yeah, that's true, too. I mean, if he wants to be completely honest with her, he would also say, by the way, I've got a part of your soul. But he's clearly not being honest. He's just manipulating.
And he's also like, hey, you know, look in Revendreth. Look at all these horrible people that are in Revendreth. Oh, by the way, you know, you're not as bad, but you'd be going straight to the Maw because, you know, you're tainted by Arthas. And that's, like, getting under Sylvanas' skin, how, like, you know, it just plays into the sense of unfairness that, you know, now she's, like, damned forever just because of Arthas, and, like, you know, Zul'jin and, like, all these other characters that did horrible things have less of a fate than she does.
Mm-hmm.
So what's also very interesting here is that the interviews all made it seem that when Sylvanas spoke to the jailer, that's when the deal began. But she still doesn't agree to work with the jailer.
Yeah.
She's
not
goes
convinced.
off,
Mm-hmm.
and she still makes it clear she doesn't trust him.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "I do not give my trust easily, and I still do not trust you." And the jailer's like, "Oh, well, you'll see the truth of my words because here are some prophecies, and they will happen." Mm-hmm. And that's pretty easy to make cosmic prophecies happen if your dreadlords are, manipulating all of the forces,
Mm-hmm.
So between things happening, like the Burning Legion returning, and, Vol'jin passing away, and another interesting thing is that it's so meta. So in the book War Crimes, Varisa was reconnecting with Sylvanas and then abruptly cut ties, and Sylvanas felt super betrayed even though she was going to kill Varisa, so they would live in the Undercity. It's complicated, but basically in this book we see that
sisterhood. Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a lot in the book of Sylvanas's old blood elf connections and family rejecting her, and Varisa rejecting her was just like purposely, it just like killed like her last sense of hope. Mm-hmm. And the book makes it clear that since Sylvanas was after the jailer's words, like, it just sort of biased her to look for injustice everywhere.
Yeah.
And Varisa rejecting her was just like, okay, like, yeah, like, this life sucks, like, everything sucks, like, nothing good happens to me, I agree with the jailer.
Yeah, so this is proof of injustice.
Yeah, so between Sylvanas being down and the jailer's, like, carefully orchestrated prophecies starting to come true, like, Sylvanas was, when Vol'jin died, Sylvanas was like, wow, like, that really sucks, like, like, this system is horrible, like, I'll agree with the jailer, I'll agree to remake Life and Death. She agrees to work with the jailer. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that Vol'jin's death and the Whispers, all of that was orchestrated by the jailer's associates in retrospect. So,
mm-hmm.
It's interesting how a lot of these things that seemed like Sylvanas was particularly unlucky was orchestrated by the jailer to kind of convince her to join him. So,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's kind of how it is. Sylvanas did not work with the jailer officially until the start of Legion. And
exactly.
Yeah, so all of that is actually a lot more interesting than Sylvanas during Wrath was, suddenly agreed to work with the jailer, and, they've been working together since Wrath.
This gives a lot more perspective, and it took her time to be convinced, it wasn't immediate, and he was playing on her weaknesses, and he was lying to her straight up in order to do so. So it does give a lot more perspective, and it also makes more sense that it's a more recent thing with her, with being from Legion, rather than like she's been doing it all along. And it also gives her more personality too, because it's not that she was, it's not because her soul wasn't whole and she's been like dominated since. It's she was just simply convinced after some time, after seeing her own injustices and everything. She was convinced that this is the better way to restart things, to make things fair again.
Yeah. And I believe that the interview touches upon that as well.
Oh yeah.
Like, we asked her, like, her rejection by Varisa seems like the final straw. Was she worried about her family that wanted her to remake reality? Was she blinded by it? And Christy Golden was like, Sylvanas in the novel was set up even in life to be someone who can, like, super rationalize things in order to achieve her goals. And, the deeper she gets, she has this, like, sense that sacrifices need to be made for what she perceives as justice, and that Varis's rejection was so painful, it brought her to the point of truly wanting to do what the jailer said she needed to do to eradicate all of her softness and caring fully. And, that the jailer says there'll be time for kindness, but not now. And she also talks about, like, confirmation bias, how, as all of us have experienced, when something is on our mind, we subconsciously are on the lookout for it. When you are thinking about buying a red car, suddenly you see one every time you're out and about. It was a lot of fun to look at various moments in her life the way she might and see there a grave unfairness. So, I mean, it definitely seems like they were trying to go with the sense how, when she was alive, she maybe handled things in ways that weren't great, that she was always rationalizing, and then when the stakes were even higher with the jailer, and he was making everything around her seem super awful, that, and she was, like, super feeling rejected by everyone from her old life, that she was, like, very susceptible to feeling manipulative. And she was looking for signs, and the jailer, like, orchestrated, like, these very dramatic signs around her. So, but yeah, I do think that it would have been cool to have room for this to breathe a little more in the book, but, I do think that all this was interesting, and it would have been really good to see some of this in game.
Yeah.
Especially, like, her bargaining with the jailer. Like, I think that would have been a really good Illidan-style questline. Yeah, like, this book, what we're describing, it seems like the Illidan retcon questline, how it's like, maybe retcon's the wrong word, but it's the whole, like, actually, you didn't know Illidan's side of the story, and then you feel really bad reliving the Black Temple and, killing him.
Yeah.
Like, I could definitely see a thing where it's like, okay, you hit Renown 10, you're gonna go on a story to relive Sylvanas' childhood. Okay, Renown 15, you're going to see Sylvanas as the Ranger General. Renown 20, you're going to
all split up into different parts, yeah.
Yeah, like see Sylvanas get her body back, like, a Wrathgate questline, a Jailer questline. Like, I think all of that all of that would have made a lot more sense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think, yeah, adding more story to it, and especially the parts that explains the goals and her thought process in this expansion, because we're sitting there seeing these very, like, good cutscenes between Sylvanas and Anduin, but we don't actually know what's going on in her head. So if we could have a background through these, through a quest line of sorts, maybe split up, like you said, into different parts of the Renown, I think getting that background information would, it would give a lot more context into things.
Yeah, especially because the book uses those, like, interactions between Anduin and Sylvanas as framing devices, so Sylvanas will talk about her childhood, and then, like, Anduin will react to it. And I think it could have mimicked the book if it's like, okay, we have a cutscene with Sylvanas and Anduin. Okay, and then, like, maybe for 3 weeks in between, we have, like, the Sylvanas quest, and then we have another cutscene between them. Like, I think the cutscenes were great, and if we just brought more of the book structure into the game, it would have balanced it out.
More of those kind of conversations that explains a bit more. Yeah.
Especially because, like, there is this very clear parallel set up that Sylvanas has a younger brother, and, like, he's, very into music. He's not athletic like the rest of the family, and she always wants to be very protective of him, even though, like, some other people make fun of him. And he dies in one of the troll attacks, and she has so much guilt that she didn't end up training him sooner. And she kind of puts Anduin, views Anduin
into
like
shoes a little bit.
Her brother.
Yeah.
And that's actually how Anduin is like, oh, you still have some of your humanity, because she realizes that she's eventually is not doing the right thing by treating Anduin like her brother interchangeably, but Anduin's like, hey, like, you know, you still have this love and protectiveness for your brother and family somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you know, there's still, like, you're not beyond redemption. So, but like,
Yeah,
this character,
so if we could feel
not
that too.
in the game, he's just in the book. So
yeah, if we could experience and feel that through doing the things in the game as well, I think it would say a lot instead of us just being confused about what happened between Sylvanas and Anduin. And I think having this background also kind of explains a bit more why Anduin might stay in the Maw instead of going back home straight away. I think if we had seen their relationship kind of grow over time, and we would, you know, maybe we would even make that call ourselves that she's gonna shoot the arrow on the jailer because her conversations with Anduin have been so successful. But instead, it became a big question mark. Like, did they discuss anything? Did they get anywhere? Did she show slight signs of humanity in those cutscenes when Anduin didn't want to be turned straight away? Or what happened?
Yeah. And, yeah, between knowing the background of Anduin and, you know, I Will Never Serve, that not being just a throwback to Arthas, but also how the jailer once was like, we're equals, and now the jailer is going back on his word.
Yeah.
Like, that would have made a lot more sense if we just had these moments in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we discuss some of the other moments that were kind of mysteries, like the involvement with the Wrathgate, because that interview caused a lot of controversy, how it made it seem like she was behind the Wrathgate, and because this came out at a time where people were upset with Sylvanas during BFA, people assumed that to mean that, like, she ordered it exactly how it went down.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't quite the case. Sylvanas thought that the Blight was a good weapon to develop if it had a chance of destroying the Lich King.
Mm-hmm.
But she did not know that Putris was working to betray the Undercity. And Sylvanas, leading up to Wrathgate, was, you know, kind of impressed that the Alliance and Horde, you know, were working together. But she was, you know, her orders did not involve a vengeance of the Forsaken. And she was very upset how it went down. She thought to herself that it was a complete mess. And if Arthas, and she was horrified by it, and she just rationalized it as, well, this is a mess, but if Arthas had died, it would have been worth it.
Yeah.
But
he didn't.
She was very, you know, she was very upset that he defied her orders. She did not include, you know, he was using it for his own motives. She, you know, she barely escaped with her life. And she even says, you know, what should have been her greatest, most satisfying moment was stolen, twisted, and used against her, against the Horde, against the Alliance in this one act. Putris had, instead of destroying Arthas, slain those of the Horde and the Alliance who had chosen to fight together. And she said also, she knew that if she had been successful in killing Arthas, she would have counted the lives lost at the Wrathgate worth it.
Yeah.
So, you know, if basically Arthas is top priority, but the way it went down, she was very upset. This was not her plan.
It was not her direct plan at all. Yeah.
Yeah. The plan was not, oh, you know, I have this crazy plan to kill Arthas, and it will involve, you know, everyone dying. It was, I'm going to do what it takes. I thought this would have focused on Arthas, and Putris instead, like, went rogue and did all this additional chaos, and it became clear that Putris was never aligned with Sylvanas in, you know, having Arthas be the top priority. Like, the betrayal was the top priority instead.
It seems like some of her exact words here were, We must be ready as soon as possible, and remember, you must not, under any circumstances, hesitate to deploy the Blight if you have a chance at destroying the Lich King.
Yeah.
And
so, you know, yeah.
And then afterwards, Putra says, I fear, or wait, so first she says, before knowing what happened, then you have done well. Why all the theatrics, though? If Arthas is slain by your Blight, then we should celebrate. You will be a hero of the Horde. And Putras then says, I fear that will be problematic. You see, I'm afraid there was some spillage. Dranosh had a nasty accident with a Runeblade. Bolvar developed a bit of a cough, as did a few hundred others. And Arthas left the party early. And her response is, Putras, what have you?
So, and it's like cold horror seeped through her. So she was not happy.
Yeah.
And she was surprised. This was not her plan at all to bring everyone together and, you know, blight the Alliance and Horde.
Yeah.
Which, I don't think the book went into it, but it's interesting in retrospect because after she, you know, aligns with the Jailer, she's always taunting Sourfang about his son. But like we see here that before she was working with the Jailer, she was really upset how this went down and was mad how this further divided the Alliance and Horde.
Yeah.
So, you know, pre-Jailer Sylvanas, you know, was actually upset that how Sourfang's son, you know, was, was slain. Even if, you know, post-Jailer Sylvanas is like, aha, like, maybe you'll just die and join your son. So
yeah, no, exactly. Like, it wasn't meant to just it definitely did not happen in the sense that she's happy to just destroy everything. It's that thing where like the Jailer touches upon it too, right? Doing the right thing, coming to the end game with whatever it takes, right? And for her, the end game was to kill Arthas. And if that had happened, she would find, you know, all of the other sad things worth it. But she didn't want all the other things to happen as well. And since he didn't get destroyed, she's very upset about this.
Yeah. So I think, but, you know, it was like manipulative almost how, like, the media came out because, you know, you say right after everyone hates Sylvanas that, oh yeah, she was involved in the Wrathgate. And everyone is just like, oh my god, like, you know, like, you know, like, obvious, you know, Sylvanas is taunting Sourfang about his son lost during the Wrathgate, like, you know, when she's, you know, burning Teldrassil and blighting Undercity, you know, like, she must have been 100% behind, what happened at Wrathgate. And it's like, oh, you know, so, that was not handled well. Like, maybe it was, like, purposely leaving some facts out to rile people up for engagement. The person who did the interview is someone no longer at Blizzard, so, you know, did questionable things.
Maybe even at the time he knew that he was soon not going to be at Blizzard anymore, so, yeah, maybe that's why he wanted to stir a little bit in the pot.
So another controversial moment that's explained is Teldrassil, and this is after she's working with the Jailer, and we can see here that, you know, she is, her philosophy on things has hardened. She's like a more extreme version of herself with the Wrathgate. You know, we were just talking about, you know, anything it takes as long as we get to our goal, and now that she's working with the Jailer and is getting more cold, you know, she's shifted.
And that concept is encouraged as well, because he says it too, right? He's looking for an ally who can do what needs to be done, you know, no matter what the costs. So it's all enhanced.
So, you know, we see here that, so first a parallel is made to how when Sylvanas was a Banshee, sort of chained to Arthas, that, Arthas would give her commands to, you know, kill civilians, kill children, because that was a way of, you know, killing hope. And when it's then, you know, when she is at Teldrassil, this is like the first time she doesn't feel bad thinking of that memory. So the book is making it clear that, like, you know, she's getting out of touch with her humanity. But Sylvanas is rationalizing Teldrassil as, you know, this is a bad thing for the greater good. So we hear her talking to Dalaran, and it's what she says in the cinematic of, you know, don't grieve, you know, you'll soon be with your loved ones. And she's like, oh, she revealed a promise, a secret that the Night Elf would not understand, not now, but would one day. And then Sylvanas follows that up with, you know, all lives ended eventually. You know, all souls must go to some afterlife. In a way, the lives that the jailer had asked Sylvanas to deliver were ending a threat. Righting the grievous wrong the Makers had done to all that existed. So Sylvanas thinks that this is, you know, a necessary sacrifice to right the wrongs later on. And then the book makes it even clearer because it says, certain in her knowledge that the suffering was finite and the joy that awaited them was infinite, Sylvanas Windrunner ordered the world tree set aflame, and countless numbers of souls surged forward to the maw, the jailer, and true freedom. So, yeah, that's what she thinks. She thought that she was doing this for a payoff later on.
Yeah, she simply believed that it was the right thing for later on. And her saying, don't grieve, you'll soon be with your loved ones, might be taken as a cold threat, but she actually just meant it.
Yeah, especially
in a
if she's
weird
thinking
way.
that with Shadowlands, you don't end up with your loved ones. And she's like, you know, if I remake reality, you will
I will make sure that
ones.
you end up with your loved ones, yeah. With these sacrifices.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, she's saying, like, you know, wars were always fought for ideals. No one fought a war simply to kill, and neither did Sylvanas. So she is, so, you know, Sylvanas is going off thinking that this is, a big thing, that she's doing, but then it's a reminder that she is kind of acting like she did under Arthas as the Banshee to kill Hope, and it's showing how much she's lost her, 1 second. Okay, sorry, I just had to answer a question.
That's okay.
Yeah, with work chat. But yeah, going back to what I was saying, Sylvanas is, not bothered by her being a Banshee and killing people at Silvermoon. And that kind of should set off alarm bells. So, you know, even though Sylvanas thinks she's doing a great thing, it's like, actually, no, this is very worrisome. That, you know, she's not bothered by remembering how she was told to kill the innocents first.
What part are you referring to now?
Oh, so in chapter 8, it is Arthas's voice floated back to her, still sharp and cruel as the sword with which he took her life, killed the innocent first. For the first time, Sylvanas did not balk at the recollection.
Gotcha.
It did not matter where a useful thing came from, only that it was useful. Arthas had been right. And it's like, oh, that is not good.
Yeah, no.
So, yeah. So
he was a weak vessel in the end, but Sylvanas and Zoval would succeed, where he and the Lich King had not.
Right. And remember that when the jailer talked about the deal, it was, oh, you know, like, the Lich King and I were both used by the same magic, and, you know, you know, I never liked Arthas, you know, he didn't do a good job with this. So, you know, here she thinks that, Arthas did not do a great job, and it's like, oh, actually, you know, this was all part of the jailer's plan. So, but yeah, it shows here that her perspective on things has changed since the Wrathgate. She's gotten more extreme about the sacrifices required, and it also shows that she's basically
More desperate.
just like giving up hope.
Yeah. Or truly believing that you have to go to these lengths to have a chance at hope, because just regular hope is pointless. Can't just sit and hope.
Like, she's just given up that, things can go on as they were, that there is just, her existence is not worth it, that all she has to look forward to is this beyond. And that goes back to the interview, how, like, Sylvanas is so good at rationalizing things that she doesn't see that she has blinders on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, which is, I didn't put this in the notes, but the book sets up this very interesting parallel, how, in the very first chapter, we see that, the Ranger General position was meant to be given to Ilaria, and it's passed down in the family, and Sylvanas' mother gives Ilaria a very difficult task, to prove herself, and it's to show to her people that she's not going easy on Ilaria, that, Ilaria will have earned the position. And it's also meant to be like, how does Ilaria deal with challenge? Is she going to, fail? If she fails, how will she problem solve? How does she handle defeat? But Sylvanas panics so much that she sort of barges in and, kills the thing that is giving Ilaria trouble. And it's showing that, like, Sylvanas is acting out of the sense of protection for her family, but if she took a step back, if she had stayed out of it, it would not have caused as many problems. Like, Ilaria would have defended herself, the mom would have shown to her people that she wasn't being, lenient on her daughter, it wasn't nepotism, she would have seen how Ilaria reacts to challenging situations, she would have understood her as a leader. But, Sylvanas doesn't think of that. She just, like, panicked that, Ilaria was, like, going to die and, had to rush in and was, like, super efficient at, killing this dangerous foe. But, yeah, it's just, like, even in her life, it sets up that out of this sense of love and, like, protection and fear, that she just sort of rushes in and doesn't think of the consequences or the bigger picture.
Yeah.
She just kind of like, or she's like, okay, I have one goal. I'm going to do anything possible to
reach
do this
that
goal.
one goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So, once she's set on something, you can't, like, talk her out of it. So yeah, we can see here with Teldrassil how she's just totally convinced herself that, this is fine. Which is really sad. So yeah,
do we feel happy with this?
I mean, I think, again, I would have liked to have seen this more. Just, I still don't think Teldrassil needed to burn. I still don't think that story was handled very well in an MMO.
Yeah.
But,
agreed. Like an entire city, like so many civilians, and, for anyone who RPs, it's like you're not meant to ever go back to the city again. It's a bit, it's harsh. It didn't need to be that harsh. It could be a large population of, maybe like Night Elf soldiers or something, but not like the whole city. That doesn't make sense. Yeah,
but I do think that the book, the novel tried to, not the novel, like, BFA was all like, this is morally gray, like, genocide, haha, like, it was not handled very well, and I think that if the short story had included this perspective, it would have made more sense to be like, something is up with Sylvanas, because the book made her very, like, cold and calculating. Like, it was purposely hiding something. Like, there were a few hints, and it's just like, we can just tell the story like it's a fascinating, tragic fall from grace that someone thinks they are doing the right thing, and it's this horrible, like, upside-down sense of ethics. I mean, I think that would have been...
I agree. The information should be more close to each other, instead of, finding out years later what actually happened. Maybe finding out, within the same expansion could be
or
be
in
good.
the same book.
Like,
in the
it's
same book. Like, it's more compelling now how you know, she thought that she was doing the right thing, and it's also like our first sign how like, wow, like, you know, Sylvanas has lost something. Like, this is bad. Like, this is the very first time she is not bothered by thinking of killing people in Silvermoon. Like, that is a pivotal moment for her, and we don't learn about that until now at the end of Shadowlands.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I still, again, not the biggest fan of Teldrassil, but if there was a smaller moment like this, I think that we should have the whole, like, oh, Arthas was right. I think that needed to be, like, a big danger warning sign included in whatever expansion that came up in.
Yeah.
You know, they could have even shown that in game with, like, the Forsaken, even, like, oh, like, Sylvanas has lost interest in them. This is kind of weird. You know, I think that a lot of moments in this book could have been turned into quests or, like, cutscenes or cinematics. And yeah, maybe, I don't know, COVID different things, but I think that hopefully they'll learn that they hid too much of the story this time.
Yeah.
Which I guess brings me to the final point of hiding the story before we talk about this in general. Last week we talked about Anduin. And we said that there were hints that he was going to stay behind and help Sylvanas. And we said, you know, oh, there's this talk of metal armor, you know, this must be him versus Nathanos because Nathanos is a hunter, he doesn't wear plate armor. And we were saying, you know, does this make sense? Like, you know, Anduin doesn't really get dialogue when he comes back. He doesn't interact with his loved ones like Jaina or Yen. And if he's being shipped off to the mall, like, they wouldn't just do that. They would have to, you know, maybe he's just, like, hanging out for an extra patch. Like, we were very unsure on the show. But we reread the book, and the book frequently describes Anduin as having like clanking armor. Clanking is a word specifically associated with Anduin. So when the book ends
throughout.
Yeah. When the book ends by saying that she heard the distinctive clank of metal armor, then it's very clear that Anduin has decided for an unspecified period of time to help Sylvanas in the Maw.
Yep.
And like,
why?
His whole story. Like, we've learned in a book that Anduin has gone to the Maw with, like, no cinematic, no cutscene, no dialogue, where again is like, did Anduin just go to the Maw? Or Jaina being like, he never said goodbye to me. Like, it's just, you know, the in-game dialogue of Anduin saying he needs to stay behind takes on a very different meaning when you learn in this book that Anduin went to the Maw to help Sylvanas.
Yeah, 100%.
You don't even get, like, a goodbye with, like, any of his extended family. Like, we don't get him reuniting with Bolvar. He's just going into the Maw with Sylvanas. So,
I mean, if we want to maybe give it a little bit of a, you know, benefit of doubt kind of thing, maybe technically it hasn't happened yet, so, you know, so maybe we're still going to see a goodbye ceremony of some sort, goodbye discussion. I mean, we did have that small conversation between him and, was it Bolvar?
No, Greymane. Nothing with Bolvar, even though Bolvar, you know, raised the kid.
It would make sense that it's Bolvar. Okay, so with Greymane, he talks about not being ready to go back home yet. And, you know, maybe we'll see something that explains that a little bit more before Shadowlands is completely over. I hope so, because we've had Anduin in the game since the beginning of time, it feels like. And him suddenly doing something this grand, deciding to spend time with Sylvanas in the Maw instead of going back home, it feels like it's something that we need to see in the game, prepare in the game for, you know, say goodbye.
Yeah.
Something.
And, like,
try to convince him not to.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot how the in-game would be richer if we had Sylvanas' perspective, you know, told in a quest or a cinematic, and this is like, we don't even have any of the Anduin story in-game. It's just, oh, I guess Anduin isn't here. Like, it's just, there's no hints. Like, you would not have thought that Anduin was going to the Maw if you only looked at what happened in the game. You know, based on that cinematic with Sourfang and Varian, you would have thought that maybe Anduin was trying to find, you know, important, like, his dad or his mom or something. Like, you just don't have a sense that he went to the mall. And so I don't know. Like, I feel like just putting all of that in a book is too much. And I mean, that's not the author's fault. I mean, if you're told, you know, you must do an epilogue and it must contain X, Y, Z, and, you know, X is Anduin in the maw, you put him in the maw. But, like, there were so many dialogues about the, you know, ending of, you know, Sylvanas and, you know, people reacting to her. And Anduin never even got a round of reactions after he was freed in the fight. It wasn't like Jaina had special dialogue or Gen or Bolvar. He just sort of becomes a mystery and vanishes. And yeah, like, we've grown up with him since he was a little kid, and we, you know, yeah, he kind of deserves better than that. So
yeah, I mean, because I can understand he went through something traumatic, and, you know, he's not ready to go home yet. He feels extremely guilty, and, you know, all that stuff. But it just doesn't feel fair to the people who follow the story in game, who have no idea of how he has done things with Sylvanas, any conversations that they may have had together, which apparently is now portrayed a little bit in the book. But we don't really understand that they had a kind of bonding going on. And missing that bonding part, and then also missing the discussing of this happening, that he's gonna decide to stay with her because he feels, you know, a lot of guilt. I don't think it was properly explained.
Yeah, and it's still like, even though Sylvanas did not do, you know, like, even though she was revealed that the jailer had, you know, played her, like, she still did a lot of really horrible things, and it's like, okay, Anduin, you're choosing to help her over, you know, your extended family. Like, you just don't care about anyone. Like, you don't care about Jaina, you know, Terralion, like, you know, Gen, you know, anyone you grew up with. Like, it just, it's like, did he just want to escape things? Like, the book didn't make it clear that, you know, he hated ruling Stormwind. Like, he didn't have this sense of dread, and he's like, oh, I'm better suited to save people in the maw. It just, you know, just sort of happens very abruptly, how he's kind of, you know, butting heads with Sylvanas, and now is helping her. So,
yeah,
I don't know. And it's also like, this seems like a very big deal, and if this, like, do other characters know he's in the maw? There should be a lot of actions if, once they know that. I mean, I can't see Jay being very happy that he's with Sylvanas if she was super distrustful of, you know, Sylvanas leading up to Anduin's rescue. I can't imagine Gen is very happy that Anduin has chosen to help Sylvanas over him, because, you know, he's still very upset over Teldrassil and, you know, his people being homeless once again, and the death of his son. Like, I can't imagine, you know, Tyrande will be happy, being like, oh, great, you know, like, even when this character, I like, you know, I knew I shouldn't have done this. I knew that, you know, there would be a catch, you know, she's lured Anduin into helping her, so now the Alliance is in chaos, and, like, the Horde will strike again. Like, it's just, it feels like this needs more reactions to it.
Yeah, maybe they're trying to make it a sort of calm before the storm effect, because
maybe
we also do suspect that Terralion has some, you know, potential need to cause trouble. So maybe they want Anduin to go out silently, and then, like, the crazy thing happens with Terralion, and maybe that's the sort of setup. But yeah, no, I think I would have definitely wanted to see a bit more of his thought process on staying behind and staying with Sylvanas, because at the end of the day, she was still she was the one who put him in the place that he was. So even if he can sympathize with her later, it still doesn't really make sense to stay around with her. Like, I can understand him forgiving her.
Rule.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, maybe he doesn't want to rule, but that doesn't mean I'm going to, like, go on a road trip with this character that imprisoned me and was responsible for, like, you know,
like, she was
giving
still
me all this trauma now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I feel like, for him being a very empathetic person and everything, I can understand him potentially sympathizing and, forgiving her and maybe feeling a little bit bad for her being on punishment now for the foreseeable future. But for him to stay around where the trauma happened with the person who caused it, it feels a little bit wrong. It feels like he should
Yeah.
have probably gone home, but be left alone. Not to rule,
Yeah.
but to be left alone, think about things, maybe, spend time
Give
reading
him like the
books.
Khadgar treatment, like just put him in like Karazhan or like
Yeah.
Magni, being like, I'm gonna go off and reflect on things now, or like maybe him and Bolvar will be like, we're gonna like just talk about being like screwed over by the jailer and just have some
Yeah.
father son bonding time, like just I don't like yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why they would put him in the maw for like forever. So
Yeah.
but yeah, so that's our discussion of the book. And yeah, it's basically, I think that the book had a lot of goals. Some of them almost were contradictory, like, explain all these rapid fire things, but also like portray Sylvanas with like 3 different personalities, all in 300 pages. I think it delivered as well as it could, but obviously, I thought some things were left out, most notably like showing her actually being in her element as a leader, and just giving the book more room to breathe. And then there's also the bigger question of, like, do we need these books? Like, did this book make sense to come out in the epilogue? Should have come out in, 9.0 instead? It shouldn't, do we need to read this book to understand the main villain's motivations for the entire expansion? And
Yeah.
I think that, like, the book should have been a fun read, but we also needed more of this in game. Too much of this was in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the part. The part that makes different expansions feel a little bit of a question mark and feel incomplete in a way. To be completed by the book feels wrong, especially the jailer part, because jailer has been a big question mark. And the Sylvanas relationship with that, how does someone who says she'll never serve end up serving? It's a lot of character destroying traits that happens or that is implied in some of the actions that are not explained properly. Apart from that, like having different stories being told of her growing up and everything, I think those are nice things to have in the book, because then it's like side stories that are not needed to understand what's going on in the expansion, but it's nice, nice fluff for anyone who wants to dive deeper. And I think that's like a good function for books to be for the people who are, extra fans, to dive in and learn about things that are not necessary to understand anything that's going on in the game, but just extra info for fun. Is awesome. But yeah, the parts between her and the jailer should have been in the game already. The parts with her and Anduin apparently spending time together is also a little bit of a question mark. The rest of it, I think, maybe feels okay to be as part of the book. Or what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the childhood stuff and the, like, her young adult life, I think all that makes sense to be in the book. I don't mind elaborating on some of the scenes with Anduin. I just think it went too far, how there was this whole parallel with Anduin and her brother, and, like, none of that is visible in game.
Yeah.
So I do, I also think that, having the full conversation with the jailer documented isn't a bad thing in the book, but I think that key moments should have been dramatized in the game, through a quest line. But it's nice having like a book as like a source text, so you could like refer to the exact words if you can only do a quest once.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think that this book could also have been released earlier, and the epilogue could have been done as a separate short story released on the website. And if it was on the official website, that would have been free, not paywalled, and people could have been like, oh no, like, what happened to Anduin? Like, because, more people read, the official website. And if that was its own standalone thing, that could have been expanded a little more to maybe be from, like, Anduin's point of view instead of, I don't know, have, like, something from her point of view and his.
That's true.
Yeah.
Like, we could have taken part of the things that happened between the jailer and Sylvanas through what Sylvanas told Anduin in the game, for example.
Yeah.
Maybe in the cutscenes we would hear how she tells her story a little bit, but then in the book, maybe we see it directly from her inside her head.
Yeah.
So maybe there would be slight differences and nuances, and that's interesting enough for a fan to be interested, but still for the most important bits to still be in the game's, you know, cutscenes and different things. Because we did suspect that there's something going on between Sylvanas and Anduin a little bit, because we saw in the cutscenes that Sylvanas seemed slightly softer. We noticed that she didn't want to force Anduin, so like there was a little bit of nuance there, but not enough. I think there could have been a lot more with her talking to him about her past, maybe the deal with jailer and all that stuff a little bit deeper would have made more sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, but, you know, it's hopefully lessons learned for 10.0. I mean, I think it naturally has to be better because Sylvanas has been built up as this character that's been so confusing for several expansions that there's a story we don't know, and now she's out of the picture. So hopefully 10.0 is a fresh slate where if there's something in a book, it can be explained in the game going along with it. And if there's a misstep where they keep something secret, it won't be like, you know, 10 years of secrets with a character. It will be like, you know, a patch worth of secrets.
Yeah,
so,
like it should 100% at least be in the same expansion, you know.
Yeah.
Like getting answers on Wrathgate now, like getting answers on BFA now, like it should happen sooner.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I do think that, you know, if you're like a fan of, you know, elven culture, the first half is really enjoyable. Nathanos is actually not super annoying as well. Like, he comes across more nuanced, and even when everyone hated him in BFA, but there's even a moment in the book where he's like, can't we just, like, run off Sylvanas? Like, you know, you helped the jailer in BFA. Can't we just, like, you know, be together? Like, you know, like, he even comes across that, like, he's like, you know, I'm basically around just, you know, like, I owe my, you know, existence to you. Like, basically, you're what keeps me going. And you can tell that she's super cold because she's just like, no, the jailer. So you actually end up feeling kind of sad for him. How, you know, he always was serving her, and she, you know, at one point he's like, let's just run away. And she's like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's a good book. I'm really grateful that we got the chance to interview the author and the advanced coverage so we could prep a lot of, like, summaries of the important reveals for everyone.
And the interview is also...
Yeah.
Sorry. The interview is also on Wowhead's website if you want to read the questions and the answers. Both the questions and the answers are quite beefy, so, you know, it's like a paragraph for each thing, so it's not like one sentence answers, one sentence questions. It's a proper interview, so it's quite nice to get some insight that way.
Yeah. So, yeah, so I guess that's about it.
Yeah, I think that covers everything we wanted to talk about. All the snippets of the interesting parts of the novel to discuss, and the Dragonflight stuff.
Yeah.
Slash WoW Dragonflight.
Yeah, we will learn in 2 weeks what is up with the new expansion.
Yeah.
So.
The 19th is a Tuesday.
Yeah. So who knows? Maybe the reveal. I don't think we know the exact time of the reveal.
No,
but,
we don't know yet.
Who knows? Maybe it'll be right now. You know?
Yeah, maybe it'll be like this moment, but in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you everyone for watching and tuning in. And we try to keep track of chat as well. If there's anything that feels like, oh, like we should, you know, touch on that, then we keep that in mind. So you should always feel free to ask questions if you want us to discuss a particular angle of anything. And Also, these VODs always go up onto YouTube, so if you're watching on YouTube now, know that this was live on Twitch once upon a time. And if you want to ask questions live on Twitch, that's totally fine. If you want to ask questions on the YouTube video itself, that's also cool. And yeah, we try to keep track of everything. And we'll be back again next week.
Yeah. So yeah, see you guys.
Yeah. See you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.